Hey there folks, my name is Anthony Kearney, this is Colorado Curated, and this is Family Meal. So what is family meal for a lot of people? For a lot of people, that's what you think of when you have a Sunday dinner. It's what you think of when all of the cousins, grandma, grandpa get together. However, for those of us in the industry, it does mean something different. Given the fact that most chefs, most servers work about 100 hours a week, anywhere between 60 to 100. We spend more time with each other than we do with our own family. So staff meal, things that we would whip up for each other, is also for us considered family meal. So here at Colorado Curated, what we're going to do is once a week, I'm going to release a video of something that we're sending out to our guests for them to see how we create what they're eating, and also for you guys to be able to follow along at home if you'd like to make it yourselves. So today we've got a meat glazed pork belly with roasted Brussels sprouts. Something easy, something delicious, but something that most people don't know how to make or haven't thought about making. Let's get started. So as you can see here, I've got the entire station set up for all of my mise en place. Got an onion, lemon, ginger, a little bit of thyme, some Brussels sprouts, and of course, the star of everything, the pork belly. Now, with pork belly, it's really crucial that you get a good piece of pork belly. A lot of pork belly that you're going to find is going to be mostly fat. You want a rough 50-50 percentage on your fat to meat. It doesn't look like that when you look at this. It looks like it's mostly meat. However, as you look at the inlays and how much fat is actually layered through this, it's going to be about 50%. Now, this is bacon, pre-bacon. So mine came skin on. It's very easy to remove that. You just put your knife directly underneath, make a little incision, and just make small slices. It's not hard. It'll come right off. It's actually incredibly difficult to cut through skin unless your knife is extremely sharp. So, as you're going down, remove that. And there we go. So, we're going to be searing and braising this piece of meat. So whenever you're dealing with anything cooking-wise, the smaller it is, the faster it's going to cook. So make sure you're going to cut it into relatively small pieces so that you don't have to wait for 5 or 6 hours for this to fully cook. Set that off to the side. Sprinkle with a little salt. Get that onto the board. All right, and we got one more piece right here. All right. Now since we've just cut meat on this board, we're going to wash it, sanitize it, and return right back. All right, now for the next part, what we're gonna do is break off about a 1-inch piece of ginger. This is gonna be for the glaze. Now, mead is a honey wine that dates back well past Viking era. Everybody assumes that it starts in Viking era. However, there are historical records of a mead style of drink that was found in Africa well before the Vikings even thought of it. So when you're doing this, a lot of people can peel these with spoons and that's all fine, but genuinely, you don't need to do that for this because you're not trying to really reserve a lot of this because we're going to use all of it. cutting that off and just chopping this up. So, with mead being a honey wine, ginger, thyme, honey, and pork are about as great of a combination as you can get with regard to sweet and savory. Setting that off to the side. Now, thyme is a wonderful herb. A lot of people want to pick it, chop it, all of these things, and if we were using a different application for it, I would 100% agree with them. However, we're turning this into a glaze. So the wonderful thing about this particular herb is that it's just going to fall apart on its own in the glaze. So we're also going to set that off to the side. Now, this lemon is going to be a little bit different than most people. Remove the sticker, because while they're edible, they don't taste good. For a lot of people, they're going to take a microplane, a zester, and do all of that. Again, there's no need for that. You could just take a peeler, and you can peel that right off. We're going to do about a half a lemon's worth of peel. All right, I'm going to set that off to the side. And then we're going to move over to the stove, get all of this warming, get all of it ready. We're going to make the glaze. We're going to get the pork seared in the oven to braise, and we'll move on to the Brussels sprouts from there. So first thing we're going to do here is get our oven preheated. You're going to want to braise these at about 350 degrees. You can go lower, slower. The more you do, the more collagen's released. These will become unctuous and sticky and delicious if you do. However, 350 degrees allows you to start at 330 and still be able to eat dinner by 5 or 6. So that's what we're going to do today. And while that's preheating, we're going to build these. All right, so in the left here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn it on to a medium heat, and this is going to be our glaze. I'm going to take all of that thyme, all that ginger, all of that lemon zest, and I'm just going to throw it in here. All right. From there, we're going to take about a cup of honey wine. Pour that in. And to that, about a quarter cup of honey itself. Now, you might be asking, why the honey wine if you're just going to add honey? Well, and now as I turn on my hood fan and as it overpowers everything around it, you get a voiceover. So why you add honey is because honey can become cloying if it's on its own. However, when you add mead to honey, you get all of the flavor of the honey with none of that extra sweetness. Honey by itself can become almost cloying. So over here, we're going to turn our cast iron onto a medium-high heat to start searing. Now, you don't want a whole lot of oil into this pan. Just a very thin coating will do you. So I add a small amount of oil, and then just take a brush and paint the bottom. Now we're going to lay these fat side down into a cold pan that is lightly oiled. The reason that you do this is so that you can render the fat slowly. If you don't do this part, what you're going to get is a fatty and chewy piece of pork belly. And that's not really what we're after here. And because I can't talk without moving my hands, here's a bunch of gestures that you guys really don't need. But as we flip this pork belly and it becomes seared on all sides, it's going to develop more and more flavor before we put it into the oven. Make sure to stir your glaze to keep it moving. And salt both sides of your pork. So while these are searing, stick around to the end of the video, because while this recipe is in the description below, and it's a delicious meal, I'm going to tell you all of the ways that you can completely ignore 90% of what I just said and still end up with a delicious meal. So, something to look forward to.
And now we're back to voiceover. So as you can see, the tops of these pork belly are completely golden brown. So you want to make sure to flip them and get enough time for this to sear. To that, we are going to add our skin-on ginger that we cut off of the ginger pieces earlier. Now the reason that you add the skin to one and not to the other is because the skin of ginger has a peppery bite to it. And you want to make sure that that goes into the meat and not the sweet glaze. Now we're going to throw in some thyme. And that lemon that we're just going to cut right in half. And to that, we're going to add equal parts honey wine and some chicken stock. Now, even at home, I use store-bought chicken stock. Now, a lot of chefs out there will disagree and say that you should only use house-made or whatever else. And while I will give them that house-made stock is undoubtedly better, myself at home and those also that have careers and children and everything else do not have 24 hours to make a beautiful stock. So store-bought is just fine. Just going to put this into the oven for about 45 minutes before pulling it out, covering it, popping it back in until the pork belly is tender and you can almost tear it with your hands. Brussels sprouts most people have a love-hate relationship with, especially here in the United States. Those who love them, and those who hate them, hate them. However, they are one of my favorite vegetables. I hated them when I was younger as well. However, they are incredibly easy to work with. So as you can see, all you do is take the little root end off and then cut them into quarters. These are incredibly delicious, however, only if they are not overcooked. When dealing with Brussels sprouts, I would say almost tend towards undercooking them than over. As always, a perfectly cooked Brussels sprout is always better than an undercooked one, but an undercooked Brussels sprout is substantially better than an overcooked one. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to continue to cut these into quarters, and then we can move on to the next bit.
All right, now to cut an onion, remove the top, and this root you're just barely going to cut off. The more of this you cut, the more this onion's going to bleed. So you just take the root, just the dirt part of the root off, cut in half, pull your finger right under the first layer, and pop it off. Now, a lot of people, chefs mostly, will say you're wasting a lot of that onion. And to a point, I am. And the reason being is that the outer layers of an onion are incredibly, incredibly bitter. And the reason for that is that they have produced more and more sulfur. So the closer to the outside of the onion you get, the more bitter they are. So I removed the green parts of this onion and just brought it down to the white. Now, you can dice this. This is perfect for dicing as it is. However, since we're going to slice them, you can take that root end off and then just follow the curve of the onion. When you reach halfway, tip the onion back and continue to follow that curve. Now, the best way to avoid crying when cutting an onion is leave the root on and have a sharp knife. A dull knife is just going to break and bruise an onion. And a broken and bruised onion is going to make you cry just as much as it is. Alright, so we're going to set these two off to the side, and we're going to cook those up as we glaze our pork belly later.
All right, guys. Well, it's been about 2.5 hours now, and our pork belly has been pulled out of the oven and has rested. Over here, you can see that I've already rested it and sliced it. This allows that glaze to really cover all of these little pork belly pieces. Your glaze should have a nice thickness, and we're going to double time this just for the sake of timing. Over here, this pan should be about a medium-high heat. We're going to get this going real quick. Get your cookie sheet out. A little bit of aluminum down. Pork belly on. Grab a little pastry brush, little paintbrush, as long as it's clean, it all works. As you can see, incredibly tender. We're just going to brush each of these little guys with a nice coating of that glaze. And get it under a high broiler in your oven. And only leave it there for about 30 seconds at a time. Oil in pan, get the Brussels sprouts in. You want to make sure that you can really hear that oil sizzle when you put those Brussels sprouts in. That's going to allow you to get a nice color on them. Salt your Brussels sprouts and start moving them. Like I said, about 30 seconds later, pull out your pork belly, brush it again. You're going to keep doing this until all that glaze is gone. Five to 7 minutes later, your pork belly should be done, and your Brussels sprouts should just be getting some color. Now we're going to add these onions in. Mix them right in. All right. As those onions cook down, we're going to add equal parts honey wine, chicken stock, and a little bit of butter. Really make sure that those onions cook down before you add that into your pan. And in goes our liquids. Cover it up, let it sit for a couple minutes, and you're done.
So guys, that was the video. Hope you enjoyed it, but as promised, here's a little bit of insider information from a chef. There are about 1.5 million ways you can change the same recipe by following this technique in general ratios and still getting a good dish. If you can't find mead, a dry cider works exactly the same for this. Gives it a little more zip to it, I guess would be the best way to phrase it. You can use an IPA and just take out the ginger. You can use a dry white wine instead for the glaze. It's a really wonderful and basic dish that has a lot of variations that you can do. However, that's not really what I promised you. I promised you how to ignore 90% of what I said and still get a delicious dish. And it's by using the most important tool that a chef has. And it's an underrated tool. But it's one that I don't think any chef would argue that it's the most important thing that they have in their kitchen. It's not a knife. It's not a stove. It's this. A spoon. I know that sounds ridiculous, right? Why is a spoon the most important thing? Well, because while I'm going to give you a recipe for this, and while it's a tested recipe and it tastes great and all of that, we use different ingredients. If your ginger's older than mine, it's going to be spicier. You might need a little more honey. If your thyme is really young, it's going to be really floral. Versus if it's old, it's going to almost become herbaceous and a little earthy. I don't know what you're using, and I can't be there to taste it for you. This is the most powerful tool you can use when cooking. Taste your food. If you taste your food multiple times while you cook it, and if you feel like something's not right, or if it needs more sugar, or if it doesn't, or if it needs more salt, make sure to taste it before you serve it. It's really that simple. Surprisingly, as much as we wax whimsically about all the food that we cook, at the end of the day, the thing that we do that most people don't is taste. So, eat well, be healthy. See you next week.